Welcome to the MEND, a podcast to learn about victims and services to support victims of crime, sponsored through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I'm Anna Nassett, and I am your host for this bi-monthly podcast and show. Today on the show, I am delighted and honored to have Karen Tronsgard-Scott from the Vermont Network for Domestic and Sexual Violence here to talk about interpersonal violence during the pandemic of COVID-19. This show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime. We want to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources not only in our state, but throughout the country that could benefit all. And today we are going to be looking at immediate needs, responses, and resources versus longer term immediate needs and resources. As always, I like to begin with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics. But with that in mind, we occasionally may hear a story related to crime, discuss our mental health, or other sensitive matter. We urge you to take care of yourself and listen at your own discretion. Today, as I said, I'm delighted to have Karen here from the Vermont Network for Domestic and Sexual Violence, which I'll call the Vermont Network as we move forward through this interview. Karen is the Executive Director for the Vermont Network, Vermont's federally recognized coalition of organizations seeking to end violence against women and people. She is nationally recognized speaker on issues related to domestic and sexual violence and on nonprofit leadership. Karen began her career in advocacy and nonprofit leadership in the 1980s as a volunteer at a school for children with developmental disabilities in Colombo, Sri Lanka. She was the executive director of a domestic violence and sexual violence service organization in southeastern Ohio for 13 years prior to coming here to Vermont to lead the Vermont Network. Thank you so much for being here today, Karen.
I am so honored to be on this podcast, Anna, and just appreciate being asked. You're doing such incredible work. I watch every episode, and I just really appreciate having the opportunity to be with you.
Well, thank you. We are recording from our homes, as many people are doing right now. And initially, I didn't know if we'd be able to record during this time of quarantine. And so when I found out 2 days ago that we could, I immediately reached out to Karen as my number one guest I would want to have on right now. And I'm just such a fan of you, and you've really shaped me and my career and everything I've been doing. So it's such an honor, and just such an honor to have your voice during this time.
Well, back right at you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you. How are you doing being at home?
Well, I'm doing well. I don't know if you behind me are this little wall of mandalas. I'm on a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot, where I'm just listening because we're in conversation all the time with our federal partners and our national partners. And so I started the practice of coloring mandalas while I'm sitting on Zoom meetings. And, of course I'm taking notes, but it's a little bit therapeutic. So it's helping me, get in touch with my artistic side, and it's a good stress reliever.
That's awesome. And it's important to do something creative like that when doing this work. And I envision that shortly all of your walls will be covered, possibly.
Covered.
Yes. So this is such a important time for the work you were doing in domestic and sexual violence as we have this quarantine in place, as we're dealing with this pandemic. And so that's what we're going to discuss today. But
Great.
I'd love to start with you explaining to our listener the role of the Vermont Network for Domestic and Sexual Violence here in our state, and how each state has a similar organization.
Okay, great. I'm so happy to be able to talk about this. So in our state, we have 15 nonprofit organizations that comprise the membership of the Vermont Network, and they provide direct services to survivors of domestic and sexual violence in literally every corner of our state. And I want to mention that our membership also includes the Pride Center and their Safe Space program, which is a statewide organization. The other member organizations are localized, generally along the lines of counties. So there's an organization in every county. And the network was formed by those organizations back in 1986 to represent their voices at a statewide and in the national realm. So we do things at the network like provide lots and lots of training. we convene people to have crucial conversations. We represent the voices of survivors and the organizations that serve them in the state legislature, as well as with our congressional delegation and in Congress. And then the other thing that the network does is we work with state systems to improve responses to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And I want to say, when I say survivors of domestic and sexual violence, I'm shortcutting a little bit, because we know that the folks that are included in that, under that umbrella of domestic and sexual violence, also include people who are survivors of stalking, people who are survivors of some folks who are survivors of human trafficking, and people who are surviving dating violence. We also work very closely with the Vermont Center, I'm sorry, for the with the Vermont Domestic Violence Council to provide oversight and support for the various treatment programs for people who perpetrate those crimes, or people who are use violence in their relationships. So we have our hands in a lot of pots, and we're trying to make sure that systems and responses are meeting the needs of survivors across our state. We're not unlike organizations that exist in every state in our country. So many years ago, decades ago, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act was passed in Congress, and through that law, it established organizations like the Vermont Network. And so across the state, across the country, in every state, there's an organization just like the network. And in some states, there's two organizations. So at the network, we are concerned about issues related to all of the things I just talked about. In some states, there's two organizations. One organization that focuses on domestic violence, and one organization that focuses on sexual violence. I've only ever worked at, we're called a dual organization. I've only ever worked at a dual organization, so I don't have a lot of expertise about how they sort that all out. And I'm great. I think everyone does just an incredible job, but I am grateful to have always worked in a dual organization, because I think it just speaks to the reality of people's lives.
Absolutely. It speaks to the crossover that these
Right.
these things are not they're not separate, they're together so often, and
Right.
they need to
Right.
be responded to together. Awesome.
That's right.
Well, I am such a fan of the network, and I've really enjoyed getting to do some
you.
work with you all over the last 2 years. And as you were talking, I remembered I was supposed to be working with everyone today at the Victims Assistance Academy.
That's right.
So, I just really admire the work that you all are doing to serve all of these different organizations, and to serve the people who are working within them, and ultimately serving
Thank
victims
you.
and survivors.
I consider myself to be incredibly blessed, because the people I work with at the network, our team at the network, they're like butter. They're so great.
They're amazing.
They're amazing. I'm honored to work with them. And the people that are working in our organizations, our member organizations, are equally incredible. I mean, what they're doing right now is heroic. It's just
Absolutely.
amazing. So
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you for the recognition.
Yes. Well, let's start to talk about some of these heroic things that people are doing right now. As we began to really see the spread of COVID-19 and this pandemic across the world, I feel like you all quickly realized that this was going to be coming here, and started to put things in place. What were some of the first thoughts and concerns, and how did the network prepare a month ago, 2 months ago, for where we would be now?
Well, we really started paying attention to this, I think, across the network at the beginning of March. And, we were hearing from our colleagues in Washington State that things were getting very difficult. We were watching what was happening in direct services organizations out there. And so we started talking about what could happen. And I think we were watching for that first week of March. The second week of March, we started actually preparing for the reality that we would be working remotely. Most of the member organizations, as well as the network, watered the plants and cleaned out the fridge on the 13th of March. And folks, they started isolating in their homes. The thing that just strikes me, and I just kind of can't get over it, is how quickly these domestic and sexual violence organizations in our state transitioned from highly interactive, face-to-face service provision to equal quality remote service provision. So, the hotlines have been open without interruption since all this
Amazing.
started. It's remarkable there, and the shelter, the situation in shelters is it's difficult, and it was those first 2 weeks, starting the week of the 16th, it was wild because we were getting direction from the Office of Economic Opportunity, who are doing a fantastic job. I mean, really, you have to call out Sarah Phillips. I don't think she's actually eaten or slept since all this began, and she's unsung hero inside state government. But they started really thinking far out. They started thinking way ahead and thinking about what's going to happen when people start testing positive in shelters. How do we minimize the spread of the virus for people who are living in shelters, not just domestic and sexual violence shelters, but homeless shelters as well? So they created this system that and funded it, where folks in shelter, there's some screening that happens. People are sorted out based on their vulnerability, their risk level. High risk folks are put immediately into hotel rooms. Folks are in shelter, but we've had to move people out of shelter because we need to decrease the volume of people in shelters so we can have space. And then there's a whole set of things that happen if somebody tests positive, but they're sick, but they're not not sick enough to have to go to the hospital.
Right.
The employees at these domestic violence, the advocates, the executive directors have picked this up and just made the changes they need to make it overnight. It's
amazing.
It's really remarkable. It's something else. They're also getting, calls from the community, as you can imagine, as the state has gone into these phases of lockdown. People are not able to work. And there's this gap between when you're not, for some folks, when you're not able to work anymore, where your job is shut down, and then the resources that are designed to help you, so getting unemployment, things like that, they don't have food. So they're calling our organizations there, and mostly it's executive directors that are going in, but they're going in and they're packing up food, they're leaving it on the porch, they're just making sure that whatever the need is in the community, they're trying to meet that need. And the other thing that they're doing is working with survivors who still need access to protection orders. So the whole protection order system has moved to it's a remote system. It's all by phone. Courts are still open, but not, the door is just ajar. It's not wide open.
Yes.
So they're working with, the network runs a legal clinic. They're working with our attorneys to make sure that folks have legal representation where they're going to get a protection order. And just what this speaks to me is this amount of resiliency that exists in these organizations. They've got, their core is so solid that because the world around them is wild, but they're they are rock solid. They know what their job is, and they just keep running up to these challenges, centering survivors, and saying, okay, this is what we need to change. And so let's just do that. It's been the most remarkable 3 weeks, I'll tell you.
It's incredible. And I think in so many ways, when we're used to responding to crises, we now have this global crisis, and it's like, all right, game on. We've got this.
Right.
We can do this. We've been taking all these trainings, and we've gotten the education, and this is a whole different thing than we've ever experienced, but we can do this. And it's really been remarkable to see. I mean, I'm lucky to have Maxine Grad as my state representative here.
You are.
For our listeners who don't know, is incredibly victim-centered and very victim-focused in her work. And so I've been in a lot of communication with her and gotten to sit on some calls from the legislator to see how things are working. And I just really applaud everyone who's put these measures in so quickly and hasn't slept and hasn't eaten and is there to serve victims. Which would lead me into our next question is, as we followed our Governor Scott's orders to stay home and stay safe, how did the state begin to respond to the reality that many are not safe at home?
Yeah.
And, it sounds like the center, like all the different victim service centers are working really well, but how do we begin to think about everyone who might become a victim of domestic violence during this
Hmm.
time?
We're really worried about this situation in Vermont homes where somebody's living with an abusive partner, and don't have they don't have the space or the privacy or the confidentiality to be able to make a call or they may just be like in serious lockdown
Yeah.
and at high risk. I would say that this is probably the most frequent question that I'm asked about, what's happening in these places, in these homes where people can't leave. Um, and I have a couple of reactions to that. First of all, I wish I had really good answers. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't have really good answers. This is unprecedented. We have systems that are built um, for people who are in really difficult situations and may only have 10 minutes to make a phone call and brainstorm about some safety planning, or make arrangements to come out and meet with an advocate or decide to go into shelter. But often those situations are those are opportunities that survivors take advantage of because they have just a little space. But but it seems like there's a lot of people right now who have no space. So so the silver lining in all of that perhaps is that so many people are really concerned about these folks. Everybody from the Vermont's, the colonel of the state police to the attorney general to I can't tell you how many legislators have asked us this question. So if I could say anything to those survivors is that we know you're there, and when you get the moment to get help, we're here. We're worried. We're so worried about the increase in purchasing of guns and ammunition because we know that the presence of a gun in a violent home increases the likelihood for serious injury or death by exponential numbers. So the state has. I think sometimes people want to point fingers and blame
Hmm.
state government, and I can tell you that I have nothing bad to say,
That's
only good
awesome.
to say about everyone from Governor Scott to I mean, I just can't think of anybody who's dropping the ball. We were contacted a couple weeks ago by the Attorney General's office and the state police. They wanted to issue a joint press release reminding survivors that the hotlines are open, that help's available. We did that just at the end of the first week,
Yes.
and that was not me calling them. They called me and said, "We really want to do this. We're really worried." I've been so impressed with what's happening at the Department of Corrections. They are all hands on deck. They are
Awesome.
working so hard to make sure that COVID doesn't spread through Vermont's prisons. As you know, Anna, the Vermont network has really been part of the reform effort, especially around the Chittenden Regional Correction Facility. We,
Yes.
because we know that about 100% of the women that we house in our only female prison have experienced domestic and sexual violence. And in the past 2 weeks, they've released 36 women from the prison. I don't know if you heard the story on VPR this morning. They interviewed a woman who lives there, and she said that from the very beginning, they've had adequate supplies. They have plenty of hand sanitizer and gloves, and the place is being cleaned continuously, and they're getting information about COVID. But they're doing a really
Awesome.
great job of really making space inside the prison. I think the average daily census is around 130, 140. So they're below 90 now. And releasing folks, of course, we worry about where folks are going after they get released, but they want to make space inside the prison so that people aren't, living right up against each other. I've already talked about the Office of Economic Opportunity. They've been outstanding. Across state government, we've just heard, and I just want to mention legislators. I have heard from so many legislators, as have our staff, asking what's needed, what can we do, what are the legislative initiatives we need to consider, what, do you have enough money, how can we work with the feds to get more money into Vermont. Just over and over and over again, folks really worried about survivors and about their member organizations. And I guess the last group I would talk about is our congressional delegation. They've been in weekly emails, calls. Both Senator Leahy's office, Senator Sanders' office, as well as Congressman Welch's office, very concerned about what's happening here. In fact, I answered the phone call. I answered my cell phone the other day, and it was Congressman Welch on the other end, asking,
wow.
What's going on? What do you need?
That's amazing.
Yeah, so
that's great.
Can't say enough. It tells me that people really care about. I mean, so often, I'm going on and on.
That's fine. Please do.
People like sometimes I think survivors feel so alone.
Yeah.
You're out there on your own. And what I know is that there's people that really care about Vermonters in this terrible situation. They really care, and people with power. So, I think about what's the long arc of this experience? What are we learning from this? This is one of my big takeaways, is that we are all in this together, and there are so many people out there that are so concerned about what's happening.
That's awesome.
To Vermonters experiencing this stuff.
It's really good to hear, because in a time like this, when, I immediately started getting people emailing me, what's going to happen to people who are stuck in homes, this and that. And, in some ways it almost felt like this was a step back, but talking to you, it's like, this is a step forward, because this is immediately present for so many people. Yes. And I mean, I was kind of surprised by the people that reached out to me that weren't people I expected to be like, what's happening right now? What's being done? How's law enforcement responding? How is this going to work? And so it's great to hear that our whole state is really on the same team for this and taking it really seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know. It's amazing.
It's like, we feel like I've got my questions here. We kind of went through a bunch at once. No, it's good. Yeah. I just ask the questions and let you talk. That's really what it is.
Well, Anna, I'm a talker.
It's good. What advice? Well, I have two questions. One, how is law enforcement responding to calls that come in from homes of domestic violence? So I guess that would be my first question.
Yeah, this is a question we're asking the field all the time, and we're hearing once in a while we'll hear that the things could have gone better in a very specific case. But what we're hearing across the state is that law enforcement are still coming out. They're going out to domestic violence calls. This was a set aside in one of the I can't remember if it was a bill or an executive order, but domestic violence is a call that law enforcement will respond to, and they are responding to it. So we're not actually seeing anything different there. What we are seeing is that right now in this moment, I don't want to give this too much energy. There was a press release that was released by a group of, it's a national organization that actually wants to do away with the Violence Against Women Act. It was released yesterday. And it sounds like it's a legitimate domestic violence advocacy organization. It is not, but they were talking about decreases in the number of hotline calls, and so I just want to really reflect on what's going on right now. It has to do with your question about law enforcement, because this press release asked law enforcement about the number of calls. So I think we just talked about people that are isolated in their homes with an abusive partner, and how just logic would tell you that it would be hard for them to reach out.
Absolutely.
They don't have the space to do it. And just like the rest of us, they're also homeschooling. They're worried about how to get groceries. They're out of toilet paper, all the things that everybody else is experiencing. Survivors are also experiencing. But so what we're seeing in our state at this moment is that there is just a slight decrease in the number of calls. But the calls that we are getting the situation is very serious.
That makes sense.
It's very serious. It does. It just makes perfect sense. In talking to folks, we've been in conversation with folks primarily from Louisiana who were present and doing advocacy during the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Remember that
Hmm.
the explosion out on that rig in the Gulf of Mexico, and then Katrina.
Yep.
And what they told us is that it is not unusual in the moments in the very beginning, and we still are at the very beginning, that things are going to quiet down, but they're not going to stay quiet.
Yep.
They're, as soon as all that stuff gets settled that we talked about, as soon as there's access to phone or things get really bad inside the house, then that's going to there will be we should be preparing for quite an increase in the number of people coming for help. And that's starting to happen in Washington State.
Yep.
So, the programs are getting ready for that. And I think that the partnerships and communities between the member organizations and law enforcement they're also they're preparing for that reality. I think it'll happen.
Yeah. I don't really know how to respond to that because it just
right. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, and I don't normally feel that way on this. I can usually handle just about anything, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think like that leads me to the question is like, what can we as community members, neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
people in our I mean, I live in a very rural area. So many of
Mm-hmm.
us do here. What can we
Right.
be doing as community members and neighbors right now during this time
Mm-hmm.
to be there for others who may be in a harmful situation?
Yeah. Well, certainly make a donation. Certainly make a
Yes.
donation. I know a lot of people think, well, now's the time for me to volunteer, and I would never dissuade someone from volunteering, but understand that it is a pretty heavy lift right now for folks to do volunteer training. You can't.
Yep.
You have to have training to be able to do this work. The programs are in need of supplies, just like everybody else is. As I said, they're giving out a lot of food. They're giving out other supplies. There was for a little while there was concerns about toilet paper. There were the shelters were also
Absolutely.
operating on low supplies of toilet paper, and they were very worried about that. They found a supplier, and I think things are going better along those lines. But the thing that you could do is just ask what's needed.
Yep.
If you go to our website, www.vtnetwork.org, and under the tab that says Get Help, if you click on that, then it goes to an interactive map, and you just click on where you are on this map, and it'll take you right to your local organization. Ask what they need,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have the means to make a donation, I know they would so deeply appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everyone go donate.
Yeah. And stay home. That's the other thing. And stay home.
Yeah. Stay home. And I mean, we're checking in our neighbors. We're checking to see if people need groceries. And
right.
Making that phone call can sometimes, if there is a situation where someone's in danger, might give them the ability to share that with you.
Right. Right. We were talking this morning. We do meetings. We do a Zoom meeting with all of our member organizations every Friday and every Tuesday. And, we're sharing a lot of information, and they're sharing what's happening with them. And one of the things that is true about them, they're essential workers. So they're allowed to be out. They're state recognized that they are absolutely essential to the people that they serve, but they don't have any equipment. They don't have no masks, no gloves. And of course, what they were saying to me today was, well, we need to prioritize that stuff getting to hospitals. But they're out there, they're meeting with people, they're doing this work, and they just don't have any of that kind of supply. They don't need the whole, hazmat suit.
Yeah.
The masks.
Yeah. If you're making masks, consider looking
Absolutely.
at that interactive map on the vtnetwork.org and getting in touch to see if they could use those. Absolutely.
Yeah. I know they would welcome that.
That's a great idea. Too. Thank you for that. So I kind of want to shift as we're starting to wind back down. Like, if we have listeners right now who are in quarantine, who are at home that are in harm's way, like, what advice would you give to them? And then we'll kind of finish it up with what resources. But I'd just like to hear what your advice would be.
The thing that we always need to remember is that survivors are experts on their lives. They know their partner really well. They're experts at staying safe. They're experts at surviving. I mean, that's why we call them survivors. And so, what I would say is for all of us to recognize that. And survivors who are in homes with abusive partners will know that they already know where the places in their homes where they can step away, where they can lock a door, where they can, kind of find safety inside their home. So thinking about a safety plan is helpful. It is, for years and years, we've talked about engaging trusted family members or neighbors in just having some backup help. So that, I can remember living next door to a woman when I was, this was so long ago. I'm so old anymore, but this is like in the 1980s. And I was in my 20s, and she came and I didn't know anything about this. I was not doing this work back then. And she came and she said, listen, my husband, I have a protection order. If you see my husband, or if you see that my porch light is on, can you just call the police? And I mean, it's so interesting back in those days. So we did call the police, and nobody came. And because then we didn't have the loss, right? And so then we did, so it happened again. We called the police, but this time we said we think there's a prowler. And the police came, like 3 cars showed up in 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I'll never forget it, because honestly, I knew nothing about this. Right. And they said, when they realized that it was, that the husband had shown up, and when the police came, he disappeared. And they said, oh, the wife had said, oh, it's my husband. And they said, oh, it's a domestic, we're out of here. And we said, we just saw a prowler. We don't know that it was him. And so they stayed and they were looking around, and they eventually found him. He had gotten up onto the roof of their house, and he was hiding behind the chimney. And they brought him down and arrested him, kept him overnight. He showed up on my front porch the next day and said, why'd you call the police on me? I mean, it's a drama, right? But so the thing is that people who are living in abusive homes know what their lives are. They know what their lives are. They know that they're, if things, they know to get their kids out of harm's way. One of the things that that they might consider is, if there's firearms in the home, is hiding them, or just hiding the bullets. There might be consequences for doing that. So they have to use their own judgment. But the thing to know is that the hotlines are open, that the organizations are open for helping, that they can get a protection order, that the police will come if they call. Awesome. And that there's, a whole community of people that really care about them.
Yes, that is true. There's a whole state, a community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's response that cares for them and is there. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you share, I know through vermontnetwork.org or vtnetwork.org. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. Yeah, vtnetwork.org.
vtnetwork.org. You can find the interactive map of all the different centers in our state.
Right.
Is there any national information that you think would be like a best place for people to go who aren't in Vermont?
There's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. There's also a national sexual violence hotline through an organization called RAINN, RAINN. Those resources are on our website. And they answer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They will help for folks, if that's a number you call, then what generally happens is there's a good person on the other end of that call who will listen carefully to what's going on for you, and then help make a referral to services in state. So awesome. There's also a statewide hotline that's on our website as well. And then the local organizations all have phones that are answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Awesome. So anywhere you're listening in this world, you could go to the vtnetwork.org and
it's all there.
Get information for whatever state or area you're in, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. It's a really easy site to navigate. It's well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Karen, it's been an honor having you here today to discuss this topic, and just during this really fragile time, it's so encouraging to hear what our state is doing, and sounds like what other states are doing as well to respond to interpersonal violence right now. And I love having your voice on here and your wisdom and really your
Thanks.
leadership in our state. You are an incredible leader in our state on this.
Thank you. Thank you so
So
much. You're making me blush.
appreciative.
Thank you so much for getting the word out. I really appreciate
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for just jumping on this. I mean, within 48 hours doing this interview with me is
it.
awesome.
It's a pleasure.
If you could share one positive short message in closing to our listeners, do you have something?
You know what occurs to me in these times? There's two things. We're going to get through this. We're going to be okay. We're going to get through it. It's hard, but we'll get through it. And we're going to get through it together.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
So that's we are together.
Yep. I keep coming back to this phrase stronger together. And
Yes. Yeah,
I can feel that more than ever right now. From my little rural spot here in the hills of Vermont. I just feel so connected with so many people. So
yeah.
thank you for reminding us of that.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for being here.
It's an honor.
It's been an honor to
It's an
have you.
honor. Yeah.
Honor.
Yeah. I love you.
Love you too. And to all of our listeners, if you have any questions about this show, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me on at standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nassett, and I look forward to sharing more with you here on the MEND. Be well, be strong. We're stronger together. Thank you so much.